By the time the goose arrived at the sanctuary, her world had shrunk to the size of a cardboard box. The volunteers opened the flaps slowly, expecting panic. Most wild birds that came in like storms, full of wings and fear and frantic eyes. This one did not move. She lay on her breastbone on a towel, neck curled, wings a little spread, as if she had fallen and never quite managed to stand up again. Her eyes were awake. That was the first thing everyone noticed. The body did not answer, but the eyes followed every hand, every shadow, every new sound. Someone had found her beside a drainage ditch, half on mud and half on the thin crust of ice that still clung to the water in early spring. No obvious broken bones, no blood, just a goose that could not get her legs under her and could not lift herself off the ground. At the sanctuary, they saw too many lives that had been ended by clear, brutal things: cars, shotguns, power lines, oil. This case was not clear. The X-rays showed a spine that looked whole, bones that sat where bones were supposed to sit. The legs did not move at all when the vet pinched the skin of her toes. The wings twitched a little, as if memory still pulsed there, but there was no real control. The verdict that hung over the exam table felt heavier than words. Paralyzed. The word sounded final, like a door shutting. It did not feel final to the goose. In the first days, her life was measured in small routines: warm room, padded pen, bowls of water and food placed where she could reach without needing to stand. Volunteers turning her every few hours so that one side of her body didn't carry all the weight. Careful cleaning of feathers that gave up their natural order when they were pressed against towels for too long. Every time someone reached in to move her, she fought gravity with whatever she had left. The neck came up, the head turned toward the hand. The wings trembled, working against air that did not lift her. Many injured animals reached a point when their eyes went flat. They tolerated help or shrank away from it, but the spark that had carried them through winter storms and searching for food dimmed. It was not surrender exactly. It was something quieter, a kind of distance. The goose did not grow distant. She watched everything. When footsteps passed the door, her head turned. When a bucket clinked in the corridor, her pupils sharpened. When the door opened and a volunteer stepped in, tired from cleaning yet another cage, she looked straight at them, and for a moment, their fatigue slipped. She wanted the world back. The sanctuary had rules. One of them sat on the wall of the staff room where everyone could see it. Kindness did not always mean doing everything possible. Sometimes it meant knowing when to stop. They had to ask the hard questions every time a case like this arrived. Could the bird feed herself eventually? Could she reach water in a way that was natural? Would she be in constant pain? Was there a realistic path to comfort, even if not to release? With the goose, the answers were not simple. She could eat when the bowl was pressed close to her beak. She could drink, dipping her head slowly, though she had to work to keep from rolling forward. She did not scream or bite from pain when hands touched her joints. She flinched most when they bent her legs gently, as if confused by the absence of her own control. The vet spoke quietly with the core team. Damage to the spine, probably from a collision or a hard fall. Swelling around the cord, no guarantee of recovery, no guarantee of nothing either. There was a space between those two cliffs, a narrow place where maybe could live for a while. The volunteers stepped into that space. They gave her a name because it was hard to keep saying the goose in the corner pen to a pair of eyes that steady. Names at the sanctuary were less about the animals and more about staying human in the middle of a lot of loss. Her name settled on her after a day or two, something simple that suited the way she held on. Her new life did not look like much from the outside. There were no rivers, no sky roads drawn in skeins of migrating birds. There was a pen with foam under the towels and people in worn sweatshirts and the hum of heaters. But inside that small life, work began. First came the task of convincing her body that lying flat on the breastbone all day was not the only option. In the wild, geese stood. They rested on their feet even when they slept. Their whole bodies were built around the idea of balance over strong legs and broad webs. Without legs, everything sagged wrong. A volunteer with a mind that never stopped picking at problems stared at the pen and felt the quiet panic of time ticking in muscle and skin. Pressure sores, stiff joints, lungs that did not like being pressed downward all day. The sanctuary did not have a catalog for goose wheel chairs. There was no ready-made solution hanging in a storage room. There was, however, a corner full of old things that might be useful one day. Broken carriers, leftover foam, plastic pipes that had once been part of a duck run. The volunteer pulled them out and started laying them on the floor, rearranging, staring at the goose, staring at the pile, holding invisible shapes in the air with both hands until they made sense. The first device didn't look like much. It was a low frame on 4 small wheels, padded at the top with layers of foam and duct tape. From the sides, 2 cloth loops hung down, like the half-finished harness of a child's swing. They lifted the goose, carefully supporting her rigid body, and lowered her into the cradle. For a moment, nothing happened. She hung in the loops, legs dangling, wings pressed close, neck pulled in tight. Then the frame rolled a little. Her eyes changed. She could not walk, but the world under her was no longer flat and still. Her body hovered above the towels now, chest lifted, lungs free to expand without the weight of her own bones pressing down. She shifted her neck. The movement made the frame rock, wheels whispering on the floor. It would not flight. It was not swimming. But it was a tiny new direction, where before there had only been down. They called it a chariot, half joking. The name stuck. Every day, for several short sessions, they lifted her into it, adjusted the straps so that her weight rested on padded bands instead of twisted muscles, and let her figure out what this new thing meant. At first, she just stood there, feathers ruffled, blinking. Then she began to test it. A twitch of the neck here, a small push of the wings there. The frame responded. If she flung her head forward too hard, it rolled an inch. If she spread her wings and pressed them against the air, the whole contraption crept toward the water bowl that had been set just out of reach. In the wild, geese learned quickly what moved and what did not. Wind, current, grass under snow. Now she learned wheels. The volunteers learned with her. They learned that if they placed her facing a wall, she grew frustrated and flapped until the frame twisted sideways. If they gave her a long, clear path across the room and set a bowl or a familiar person on the far end, she leaned into it with concentration and determination until she made the wheels squeak. The legs still hung useless. No amount of massaging or stretching brought back sensation, at least not in the first weeks. The wings, though, remembered work. In geese, wings were not just for flight. They were also tools for balance, for braking, for steering on water. In the chariot, they became something new. When she spread them, the air caught, even inside the room. The thin resistance of that small indoor atmosphere pushed back, rocking the frame. Tiny movements became tiny journeys. Another problem sat like a stone in the minds of the volunteers. Geese were water birds. Their feathers, their skin, their joints, their lungs, even their minds were shaped by the presence of water that bore weight and cleaned down to the base of each barb. Without it, their bodies broke down from the outside in. Without exercise, their muscles faded from the inside out. A bird that could not stand could not reach a pond in the usual way. But maybe the pond could reach her. The sanctuary had a few small pools for waterfowl, but they were built for ducks and healthy geese that could wade in and out on their own. The paralyzed goose needed something different, something that held her safely above the floor of the tank while letting water touch every feather, something that did not drown her if she slipped. The same restless volunteer who had built the rolling frame went back to the pile of stored things. Flotation did not care whether the body belonged to a person or a bird. Buoyancy obeyed the same laws for everyone. There were bits of pool noodles, old life jackets, straps that had once held food containers in place on a moving truck. In the vet room, there were towels, wraps, soft bandages. The wing harness, as they first called it, started as a ridiculous idea and slowly turned less ridiculous as they refined it. 2 padded bands circled her chest just behind the wings, connected by cross pieces that spread the pressure. From these bands, 4 float blocks rose like blunt, bright clouds, one near each shoulder, one near each side of the tail. They tested it over dry towels first. The goose did not enjoy being handled, but she tolerated the touch better than some. The harness went on with careful movements. Straps were adjusted, not too tight, not too loose. She sat in the middle of the floor, wrapped in this absurd construction, looking like some unfinished airship. Then they filled a low, wide tank with warm water, no deeper than it needed to be. 3 people carried her together, one supporting the neck, one the body, one steadying the floats. When they set her down, the water took some of the weight from their hands. For a moment, she panicked. Her head shot up, wings flared, muscles pulled against straps that had not been there in her old life. But the floats did their work. She did not sink. She bobbed, awkward at first, but stable. Gradually, as the shock of new sensation passed, the instinct that had lived in her bones since before she was born rose. Water against the breastbone, water along the belly, water lapping at the wings. She could not kick with her legs, but her body remembered the rhythm of swimming. The wings made small, uncertain arcs. The harness took the strain. The floats creaked softly as lines shifted. She was not flying. Not yet. But for the first time since the ditch, she was not pinned to a flat surface. The volunteers stood around the tank, with hands hovering close, ready to grab if anything went wrong. The room went quiet, as if noise might disturb this fragile, ugly miracle. The goose settled. Her movements turned from frantic to deliberate. She discovered that if she moved one wing in a certain way, her body pivoted gently. If she moved both together in a slow sweep, she glided forward a little. The floats resisted, but they did not forbid. Her feathers drank in the water. Dirt and dried fluff that no amount of sponge cleaning had fully removed lifted away. She preened as best she could, twisting her neck to reach places that had felt wrong for too long. They kept the first session short. Injury took its own time, and exhaustion liked to hide under excitement. When they lifted her back out of the tank and unbuckled the harness, her body sagged, but there was a different quality to that sag. Not only gravity, the fullness of muscles that had done something other than lie still. Over the next days, a pattern emerged. Short swims in the harness. Rest. Time in the chariot to work the wings in air and keep the chest lifted. Hands that massaged thickened skin, straightened feathers, offered water and food, and the reassuring shapes of familiar faces. The goose did not understand the words that passed above her, the debates about prognosis and resources, and what would happen if months went by with no change in her legs. She understood only that, when she struggled, there was ground, and there was water, and there were new things to push against. And yet, for a long time, her legs remained quiet. It would have been easy then to decide that this was it. A bird that would never walk, living out her days in a rolling frame and a float harness, somewhere between wild and domestic, between independence and constant care. Many sanctuaries, with less space and fewer hands, would have had to make that call, not out of cruelty, but out of triage. This sanctuary, for reasons that owed as much to stubbornness as to planning, did not. They noticed a change first in the smallest of places. One evening, while a volunteer cleaned under the towels in her pen, a thumb brushed the web of her right foot, almost by accident. For weeks, that web had been cold and slack. This time, it twitched. Not much. Not enough to lift the leg or curl the toes, just a tiny, reflexive movement, like the memory of standing returning to one cell at a time. The volunteer froze, hand still under her, heart hammering harder than the goose's. Tiny things can be illusions. Nerves misfire, muscles spasm, bodies release random sparks that do not mean anything. So the volunteer waited, counted breaths, brushed the web again. The foot moved. News like that ran through the building faster than any planned announcement. By the time the vet came to test reflexes in a more formal way, half the sanctuary staff was pretending not to hover nearby. The responses were still weak, still inconsistent, but they were there. Spines healed slowly when they healed at all. Sometimes healing did not mean a return to the past, but a messy negotiation between what was broken and what remained. Nerves tried to find paths around damage, like water finding new channels after a landslide. The sanctuary did not suddenly shift her into some heroic boot camp. They kept doing what they were already doing, with a little more focus, more time in water, with the harness adjusted so that her legs were supported but not cradled too tightly. Gentle movements of the joints in the tank, where gravity had less to say. More time in the chariot with the support bands lowered a fraction at a time, so that if a leg remembered how to hold weight for half a heartbeat, it could try. There were setbacks, days when she seemed more tired, days when there was no visible improvement at all, and only the memory of that first twitch kept frustration from the door. Days when the vet reminded everyone that they were not working toward release into the wild anymore. They were working toward a life that would make sense inside fences and human schedules. Geese in the wild measured their worth in distance flown, mates found, nests defended. A sanctuary goose measured hers in other ways. She measured it in the way volunteers smiled when they saw her, in the way their hands grew more confident when they adjusted the harness, in the way more people came to stand just for a moment and watch her swim or roll as if taking strength from the sight of effort without self-pity. Slowly, the legs began to wake up in pieces, the left one first, trembling when they touched it in the water, trying to pull up against the harness. Then the right, following in uneven bursts. Her webs still did not fan out as they once had, but they stopped hanging like dead leaves. The day she managed to push herself a few centimeters forward in the tank with a combined stroke of wings and a hint of leg kick, the room felt different. No cheer went up. Sanctuaries learned to respect quiet. But a warmth spread anyway, something like hope's smaller cousin moving into its own corner. Her wings, that the volunteers had built for her out of foam and cloth, were not just the ones on her back. They were also the wheels, the straps, the rails on the tank, the hands that steadied and then let go. They were the patterns of the day that her brain could lean into like a current. Over time, they refined the devices. The chariot became lighter as she needed less support, its straps adjusted to encourage any muscle that offered to work. The float harness lost some padding and gained better balance points so that she could move more freely without tipping. A low ramp appeared at the edge of a shallow pool outside, built slowly over several afternoons out of lumber and non-slip matting, in case one day she could manage a little more on her own. Spring turned to summer. The lake near the dam grew warm and thick with algae in places. Boats drew map lines on the surface. Far away, in a hidden cove, a crocodile still patrolled his chosen territory, unaware that his story now sat on a hard drive in the same building where the goose was learning to swim again. Animals did not compare themselves. The goose did not wonder why she could not do what other geese did. She knew only what each day asked of her: movement, stillness, patience, the press of water, the push of air under her wings in a room full of human smells and human sounds. The sanctuary compared. They compared who she had been when she arrived, a body trapped on a towel, to who she was now, a bird who could hold herself upright for short periods, in the chariot without sagging, who could make small, uneven kicks in water, who could preen most of her feathers without help. It was not perfection. It was not wildness. It was not the picture on a calendar of geese running on a shoreline at dawn. It was, however, life. Word spread outside the sanctuary as well. People who followed the sanctuary's posts online read about the paralyzed goose in the chariot and the floating harness experiments and the first twitch of a foot. Some had never thought of geese as anything other than noisy silhouettes overhead and messy visitors on lawns. Now, they saw a single individual trying, without any belief in tragedy, simply because that is what living bodies did when given a chance. Support came in odd forms. Someone sent better wheels. Someone else sent neoprene scraps that turned into softer padding. A retired engineer dropped off a box of fasteners and lightweight tubing, just in case. The volunteers joked that they were building her wings twice, once in feathers and once in hardware. They were not wrong. In the end, the goose did not leave through the open gate and join a wild flock disappearing into clouds. Her legs never fully came back. She learned instead to use what she had in a new way. A mix of wing work, partial kicks, clever shifting of balance inside her devices. She moved from the intensive care pen to a larger fenced area near the sanctuary's small pond, with a ramp that led to the shallow end where her harness could be attached and removed with less fuss. She still needed help. She still needed harnesses and wheels, but she also had sky and wind and the smell of real water and the sounds of other birds nearby. On some evenings, when the staff had a moment to breathe between feedings and cleaning, someone would lean on the fence and watch her. They would see a goose whose life had fallen out from under her and then, piece by piece, been rebuilt in a strange partnership between instinct and design. They would see the way she lifted her head when a flock passed low overhead, neck stretched, eyes bright, muscles in her wings tensing with an ancient echo of flight. They would feel something move in their own chests in answer. Not all stories at the sanctuary ended well. Many ended quietly in the vet room, with a hand resting on a head and a voice offering comfort to ears that no longer heard. Grief lived there too, as naturally as straw and feathers. This story did not end in a perfect, happily ever after. It ended instead in a long present tense. A goose, paralyzed but not finished, moving on wheels and floats designed by tired humans whose hearts refused to match the first X-rays. A bird whose wings had been built once by nature and then, in a different shape, again by volunteers, so that something in her that still wanted to push against the world could keep doing so. In that long present, she glided across the pond in her harness, water snug against her feathers, the sun turning each drop on her back into a small, bright coin. Her real wings beat once, twice, sending ripples out in rings. Above her, high in the sky, a flock passed over, calling. Below, in the quiet where machines hummed and hands smelled of grain and disinfectant, a team of humans went back to washing bowls and stacking towels, knowing that somewhere on the grounds, a goose who had once been unable to move now cut a slow, determined path through the water, carrying all their effort on her back as lightly as foam. She had not given up, so they had not either. Between them, they had built wings again,